Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're joining us today, you probably already get that we're living in this weird moment where the actual architecture of human thought is being re-engineered by our tools.
Yeah, quite literally re-engineered.
Right, because you boot up a piece of software and you just expect it to remove friction. You expect it to make your job faster, cleaner, more precise.
That's the promise.
Exactly. But today we're taking you inside this massive structural blind spot in modern enterprise and healthcare, and it proves that removing friction might actually be the most dangerous thing we can do to a human operator.
Well, we're basically looking at a space where the pursuit of ultimate optimization has completely backfired.
Yeah.
And to understand why that's happening, you have to look at the physical, biological reality of how these highly advanced systems interact with the exhausted human beings tasked with overseeing them.
So to do this, we're analyzing a really fascinating stack of sources for you today. We've got the highly anticipated International AI Safety Report 2026.
Which packed with data, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Specifically, their hard empirical data on human autonomy, automation bias, and capability decay. And we're pairing that macro-level data with some incredibly sharp ground-level analysis by Prasad Bande.
His work on the automation paradox is just brilliant.
It really is. And he has this structural framework he calls restorative engineering. But we are applying a very specific lens to all this analysis today. We're looking at this crisis of attention through the legendary design philosophy of Dieter Rams.
I love this angle.
Yeah.
Because Ram's guiding principle, less but better, is basically the perfect surgical tool for this stack of sources.
Yeah.
When we evaluate AI deployment, the tendency is to just look at the maximum theoretical capability of the software. Like we look at the neural network's parameters, the processing speed, the theoretical accuracy rate.
We just keep adding layers of complexity.
Exactly. But Rams forces us to strip all of that away. We have to look at the essential geometry of the interaction.
And that means stripping away all the corporate PR fluff, too. We are completely ignoring the sanitized executive summaries that call this technology, what is it? Autonomous AI-augmented diagnostics.
Yeah, such a buzzword soup.
Right. We're going to examine the unvarnished truth about how artificial intelligence is actively breaking human attention. No jargon. No utopian projections.
Just the raw interaction between a machine making a probabilistic guess and a human operator deciding whether to trust it.
So the core paradox we're unpacking today is deeply unsettling, honestly. But it's backed up by every metric in the 2026 safety report.
Yeah, and the paradox is this. As the artificial intelligence gets sharper, the human operator degrades.
It's wild to think about.
It is. The machine's competence actively hollows out the human's baseline capability.
Okay, so if human physiology dictates that an exhausted brain will inevitably take a shortcut, we need to understand the physical environment where that shortcut happens, right?
We can't just look at Bond's analysis as an abstract spreadsheet. We have to physically sequence the workflow of the frontline operator.
Let's do that. Let's design a clear, unrelenting picture of the physics of the reading room. Because this failure doesn't happen in some well-lit Silicon Valley lab.
No, it happens at 3 a.m. in a hospital.
Picture the exact physical space with us for a second. The radiology reading room is intentionally kept dark, right? To maximize the contrast of the monitors.
Yeah, the only ambient light is usually just a harsh overhead fluorescent buzzing out in the hallway.
So you have a frontline clinical operator, a radiologist, sitting in this ergonomic chair that they've been stuck in for like 8 hours.
Exhausted.
Completely.
Yeah.
And they're staring at dual 8-megapixel diagnostic monitors. And they aren't just looking at flat images anymore.
No, modern CT and MRI scans are volumetric. They're made up of thousands of individual high-resolution slices.
Right, so the visual processing demand is just staggering. The radiologist is performing these rapid eye movements, scanning for incredibly subtle shifts in grayscale pixels.
Looking for a microscopic pulmonary nodule or an early-stage microhemorrhage.
And by 3 a.m., the biological reality of eye fatigue is absolute.
Right. The visual cortex is quite literally running out of the metabolic resources required to maintain that sustained peripheral vigilance.
The operator's brain is heavily taxed. Their blink rate drops significantly because they're just trying so hard to maintain focus.
And that is exactly when we introduce the AI diagnostic support system.
Enter the AI. And from the perspective of the hospital board, the executives buying the software in brightly lit boardrooms, this setup is pitched as a frictionless safety net.
They love that phrase, autonomous AI augmented diagnostics.
Yeah.
It implies this harmonious relationship, right? The AI does the heavy lifting, and the doctor is the brilliant overseer.
But Bond's interviews with the actual clinical staff reveal a totally different operational reality.
Completely different. When you ask the frontline operators what this AI system actually is, they don't use the executive
What
buzzwords.
do they call it?
They call it the box that lets me finally blink.
Wow, the box that lets me finally blink. That's not, I mean, that's not just a cynical joke.
No, it's a profound description of biological surrender. The software is designed to instantly analyze the volumetric scan and draw bright, high-contrast digital bounding boxes around suspected anomalies.
It highlights the problem for them.
Right, and this is exactly where the mechanism of cognitive offloading takes over.
Let's define that, because that's crucial.
Well, the human brain is a highly evolved energy conservation engine. It is biologically mandated to seek heuristic shortcuts to save caloric energy.
Especially under extreme metabolic load, like at 3 a.m.
Exactly. When you put an exhausted professional in a dark room and hand them a frictionless interface that immediately points to the problem, the brain doesn't see that as a helpful suggestion to rigorously verify.
Right, it processes it as an opportunity to shut down the peripheral visual search entirely.
Yes. The operator stops scanning the dark, complex corners of the image. The essential geometry of their workflow collapses.
It goes from a rigorous systemic search of the entire anatomy down to just a simple binary confirmation of the AI's box. The machine points and the exhausted human nods.
The visual cortex basically outsources the vigilance. The clinical staff even report a documented loss of situational awareness regarding the rest of the scan.
So they're looking at the screen, but they're no longer truly seeing the patient.
Exactly. They're only seeing the algorithm's output.
Okay, but let me push back on this framework for a second, because from a purely utilitarian perspective, isn't this exactly what we want the tech to do?
How do you mean?
Well, if I'm driving on the highway at 2 a.m., right? I'm exhausted, my reaction times are compromised. I'm going to turn on lane assist and adaptive cruise control.
Sure.
I am intentionally offloading a massive amount of cognitive burden to the car's computer. And statistically, we know those advanced driver assistance systems reduce drift-related collisions.
Yeah, that's true.
So if we give an exhausted radiologist a tool that instantly highlights potential tumors, even if it makes them a little lazy,
Yeah.
aren't we still achieving a net positive outcome? Aren't we catching stuff they'd miss?
See, that is the standard industry defense. But it totally collapses when we adopt the critical safety researcher viewpoint.
Which is what the 2026 safety report does.
Exactly. Your lane assist analogy fails on the mechanics of the task itself. Driving involves continuous, dynamic physical interaction with an environment, right?
Okay, yeah.
The machine handles the microcorrections, but a sudden obstacle still triggers a human startle response. But in diagnostic medicine, the environment is static.
Oh, that makes sense. The entire job is purely cognitive and visual.
Right. The looking is the job. So by removing the friction of the search, you aren't just assisting the operator.
You are functionally bypassing the operator's primary utility.
Exactly. And we have to look at the statistical distribution of AI failures to understand why this is so dangerous. If an AI bounding box is 95% accurate, the remaining 5% of failures are not randomly distributed.
Wait, what do you mean they aren't random?
The AI doesn't fail on the easy, obvious cases. It fails on the highly complex edge case anomalies.
Ah, like rare comorbidities or overlapping tissue.
Yes. Artifacts caused by metallic implants, things like that. These are the exact scenarios that require intense, nuanced human scrutiny.
But because the AI has handled the previous 99 scans perfectly, the operator's vigilance has completely eroded by the time that 100th scam shows up.
We've lulled the only viable backup system into a false sense of security. The AI handles the routine flawlessly, which actually teaches the human brain that the system is infallible.
Right when the system hits an edge case it can't solve. That is terrifying.
And Prasad Bhan emphasizes that we cannot blame the frontline worker for this failure. We can't accuse the radiologist of negligence.
Because they're just adapting to the path of least resistance designed into the software.
Exactly. The failure is architectural. The unobtrusive, frictionless design of the AI interface is basically fundamentally hostile to human attention.
Okay, so if that physiological tunnel vision is happening at 3 a.m., we shouldn't just be talking about it as an abstract theory. We should see a massive, measurable statistical trail.
And we absolutely do. That's what the International AI Safety Report 2026 exposes.
When you look at the hard data comparing manual diagnostic success rates against AI-assisted metrics over time, the reality of this attentional decay becomes undeniable.
The specific clinical study detailed in the report is probably the most critical piece of evidence we have. They took highly trained clinicians who had been using AI-assisted diagnostic software for several months.
These are veterans, not rookies.
Right. And they asked them to perform diagnostic evaluations on a new set of scans, but they removed the AI assistance. They forced them to operate manually.
And what happened?
Their baseline ability to detect anomalies without the software had dropped by a staggering 6%.
We really need to unpack the gravity of that 6% drop because, to a layperson, 6% might sound like an acceptable margin of error.
A slight dip, sure.
Yeah, a slight dip. But we are talking about deeply ingrained, specialized medical expertise. A 6% drop in baseline diagnostic capability across an entire hospital network.
It means thousands of missed pulmonary nodules, thousands of overlooked microfractures.
Thousands of delayed oncology interventions.
It's a rapid, measurable erosion of an expert's core competence. It shows that the brain isn't just temporarily relying on the software.
It's actively pruning the neural pathways associated with independent visual search because it just doesn't use them anymore.
Exactly. And the report attributes this directly to the systemic risks of automation bias.
But automation bias isn't just a passive reliance, is it? The report details that experiment with, 2,784 participants?
Yes, doing an AI-assisted annotation task. The mechanics of this experiment show how aggressively the human brain defends its cognitive shortcuts.
Walk us through the methodology of that study because it's vital.
So they intentionally introduced erroneous AI suggestions into the workflow to see how humans would react. And the data proved that human operators are significantly less likely to correct a clearly erroneous AI suggestion if doing so requires extra physical or cognitive effort.
The brain is actively calculating the caloric cost of disagreeing with the machine.
Exactly. If the machine says the scan is clear, and the human has a vague suspicion that something might be wrong in the upper quadrant,
The human has to zoom in, adjust the contrast, manually measure the pixels, and write a dissenting report.
right. So the brain calculates that effort, weighs it against the AI's confident assertion that everything is fine, and overwhelmingly chooses to defer to the machine.
The participants just actively discounted contradictory visual info. Once the algorithm presents a solution, the human operator shifts from open discovery to confirmation bias.
They aggressively search for visual evidence to support the AI's conclusion, instead of objectively evaluating the raw data.
This is where Dieter Rams's philosophy of honest design becomes so critical to this deep dive.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Rams argued that a product should never appear more innovative, powerful, or valuable than it really is. It can't manipulate the user with promises it can't keep.
And if we apply that to the UI of these medical systems, presenting a highly confident, brightly colored bounding box around an anomaly is fundamentally dishonest if the underlying algorithm is just making a probabilistic guess.
The visual language of the software implies absolute deterministic certainty. A sharp, high-contrast red square does not communicate nuance.
No, it communicates a binary state. The problem is here.
It completely strips away all the probabilistic math happening in the background. The AI may only be 60% confident that the cluster of pixels is a tumor.
But the UI presents that 60% confidence with the exact same visual authority as a 99% confidence score.
That is structurally dishonest design. It tricks the exhausted radiologist into believing the problem has been entirely solved,
rather than merely highlighted as a possibility. And the real risks for patient safety outcomes materialize right at that intersection of dishonest design and cognitive fatigue.
Because when the AI suffers a false negative, when it encounters an anomaly but fails to draw a box around it, what happens?
The radiologist, suffering from automation bias, simply scrolls past it. The doctor misses the tumor because the AI missed the tumor.
The redundancy of the human-machine team is just an illusion.
Completely.
Okay, but if the clinical data explicitly proves this, if we have documented a 6% drop in human capability and this structural vulnerability to false negatives, we have to ask why these systems are being deployed so aggressively.
Across the entire healthcare sector, yeah.
Why is the adoption rate accelerating when the safety data is literally flashing red?
To understand that, we have to move our analysis from the biology of the frontline operator to the systemic architecture of the enterprise itself.
We have to evaluate what Prasad Bond identifies as the disconnect in the control point metrics.
Right, because the people interacting with the AI at 3 a.m. are not the people who purchased the AI.
The deployment is driven by the chief medical officer and the head of radiology IT. They are the control point owners.
And they are evaluating the software based on an executive dashboard that completely obscures the reality of the reading room.
Those executive dashboards track two primary key performance indicators, right? Model accuracy and processing speed.
Exactly. The CMO wants to see that the algorithm has a 95% theoretical accuracy rate on training data. And the head of IT wants to see that the department can process 20% more scans per hour.
They are optimizing entirely for throughput and diagnostic velocity.
But attentional decay is not a metric on that dashboard.
The 6% drop in baseline human capability is completely invisible to the executives because the overall system throughput is higher.
They're measuring the speed of the assembly line. They are not measuring the degradation of the inspector.
Bond categorizes this as a catastrophic failure of systemic measurement.
Yeah, when you optimize a complex system for a single variable like throughput, you inevitably cause cascading failures in unmeasured variables, like human situational awareness.
The executives view the AI as a tool that enhances the human, completely unaware that the tool is actively parasitizing the human's expertise to achieve that speed.
Which brings us to the most dangerous long-term systemic risk outlined in the safety report.
We aren't just talking about a few misdiagnoses in the short term, are we?
No, we are talking about the permanent erosion of healthcare worker autonomy and skill.
If you extrapolate that 6% drop over a 5 or 10-year career, what happens to the institutional knowledge of the medical field?
The trajectory points toward a complete hollowing out of professional competence. As AI models handle more of the routine diagnostic load, human practitioners are deprived of the daily, repetitive practice required to maintain deep pattern recognition.
They lose the intuitive understanding, the complex planning capabilities, the self-regulation required to oversee the automated systems in the first place. But let me present the counter-argument that you often hear from the venture capital side of this industry.
Oh, I know this one.
They argue that this degradation of human skill is entirely acceptable because it's just a temporary transition phase.
Right.
They say if the AI is currently 95% accurate and it will eventually reach 99.9% accuracy, why does it matter if the human radiologist loses their edge? Aren't we just moving toward a future of fully autonomous diagnostic agents anyway?
That argument fundamentally misunderstands the mathematical architecture of machine learning and the nature of medical data.
How so?
The International AI Safety Report is unequivocal on this point. Neural networks are highly vulnerable to out-of-distribution failures.
Let's break down the mechanics of an out-of-distribution failure for everyone listening because it explains exactly why we can never remove the human from the loop.
Okay, so an AI model is trained on a specific data set, a vast vector space of historical scans. It learns the statistical weight and correlations within that specific data.
But the real world is infinitely variable.
Exactly. A hospital might install a new MRI machine that uses a slightly different magnetic resonance frequency, altering the contrast of the images by just a few percentage points.
Or a patient might present with a rare anatomical variation that was severely underrepresented in the original training data.
Yes. The input data shifts outside the mathematical distribution the model was trained to recognize.
And when a neural network encounters out-of-distribution data, it doesn't gracefully degrade, right?
No, it doesn't pause and flag the image for review because it feels unsure. It applies its existing statistical weights to the new data and fails catastrophically, often with exceptionally high confidence.
It'll confidently draw a bounding box around a benign artifact or confidently ignore a massive atypical lesion.
So the idea of fully autonomous diagnostic agents is just a mathematical fantasy in high-stakes, variable environments.
We're always going to need a human in the loop to catch the out-of-distribution failures.
The human in the loop is legally, ethically, and operationally mandatory. But here's the crux of the automation paradox. We require a highly vigilant, deeply expert human to catch the machine's rarest mistakes, but we've deployed a frictionless system that systematically destroys that human's vigilance and expertise.
Which turns the human operator into what Bond calls a liability sponge.
I love that term.
I want to highlight that term because it perfectly captures the dark reality of this corporate architecture. The hospital needs the radiologist sitting in the chair at 3 a.m., not because the radiologist is actively driving the diagnostic process.
Right, but because the hospital needs a legal entity to absorb the blame when the AI inevitably commits an out-of-distribution error.
The system is engineered to strip the operator of their true operational agency through cognitive offloading, while simultaneously retaining their legal accountability.
It's a profoundly unethical structural design.
It really is. So we have thoroughly mapped the decay of attention here. We understand the biological mechanism of cognitive offloading, the statistical reality of the 6% skill drop, and the willful blindness of the executive dashboards.
The problem is clear.
The critical question now is how we dismantle this automated trap. How do we apply Dieter Rams's concept of less but better to engineer a solution that protects medical staff attention without abandoning the benefits of the technology entirely?
This is where Prasad Bond introduces the framework of restorative engineering. The core philosophy here is a radical departure from the current industry standard of autonomous optimization.
What does it dictate?
Restorative engineering dictates that the technology must be subservient to the maintenance of human capability. It must actively demand human engagement.
It fundamentally redefines the purpose of the software. The goal is no longer just find the tumor as fast as possible.
No, the goal is find the tumor while actively maintaining the diagnostic baseline of the human-machine team.
If less, but better, means focusing on the essential geometry of the task, then we have to recognize that the essential geometry of a medical diagnosis is not the drawing of a digital box.
Exactly. It is the cognitive process of visual evaluation. And to protect that cognitive process, restorative engineering requires the introduction of intentional designed friction.
We have to build system-level speed bumps. We need to design specific safeguards and forced verification gates that prevent the brain from taking that heuristic shortcut.
And Bond outlines a highly specific parameter engineering solution for this. He calls it the 48-hour validation protocol, which is also referred to as the delayed overlay test.
And this isn't just a theoretical concept, is it?
No, it's a concrete, programmable safeguard designed to disrupt automation bias at the neurological level.
Let's examine the exact mechanics of this delayed overlay test, because this is where we see true structural reform. How does it physically alter the workflow in that dark reading room?
The parameter engineering is brilliantly simple. The software still processes the volumetric scan in the background. The AI still identifies the suspected anomalies. But for a randomized selection of scans throughout the operator's shift, the system introduces a mandatory 3-second latency on the generation of the bounding box.
The scan appears on the monitors, but the highly confident red square does not appear. The human is forced to look at the raw, unvarnished data for 3 full seconds.
Yes, the intentional friction of that 3-second delay blocks the brain's attempt to immediately offload the task. It forces the radiologist's visual cortex to initiate its standard peripheral search algorithm.
It demands that the human eye perform the initial sweep of the anatomy.
It essentially forces the human to make a preliminary diagnostic judgment before the machine is allowed to hand them the answer.
You know, when I read this in Bond's analysis, it instantly reminded me of the pedagogical logic in a grade school math class.
Oh, how so?
Well, a teacher will give a student a complex algebraic equation and demand that they write out every step of their work on the paper. The student knows they have a highly accurate calculator in their backpack that can solve it in milliseconds.
Right, but the teacher forbids the calculator until the manual work is done.
Exactly. Not because the calculator is flawed, but because bypassing the manual process prevents the student from ever understanding the underlying geometry of the math.
The calculator analogy maps perfectly to the reading room, with one critical distinction. In the hospital, the stakes of forgetting the underlying math are fatal.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
If the radiologist loses the ability to recognize the raw visual signature of an anomaly, they become entirely dependent on a system that we know is vulnerable to out-of-distribution failures.
And Bond's protocol doesn't just rely on the honor system either. It isn't just a passive 3-second delay where the doctor can simply stare blankly at the screen and wait for the AI to do the work.
No, the delayed overlay test incorporates a strict engagement threshold.
The forced verification gate requires a physical action.
Yes, during that 3-second latency window, the operator must mark their preliminary focal point. They must physically use their mouse to click on the specific quadrant or structure within the scan that they believe requires further scrutiny.
And they have to do this before the AI overlay activates.
Precisely. The system actively logs this interaction. It measures the human interaction time prior to AI activation, and it requires a greater than 90% physical click engagement rate during those latency windows.
So if the operator repeatedly fails to click, if they just wait out the clock, the system flags a failure of engagement.
What is so revolutionary about this parameter engineering is that it introduces clean, essential geometry back into the workflow. It removes the clutter of instant gratification.
It completely inverts the metrics on the executive dashboard.
Exactly. The head of IT can no longer just track whether the AI correctly identified the tumor.
They are now mathematically required to track whether the human operator was actively thinking, searching, and engaging with the data before the AI intervened.
We are measuring human vigilance as a core system metric. We are validating the operator's situational awareness.
And by forcing that daily, repetitive cognitive engagement, restorative engineering prevents the pruning of those critical neural pathways.
It stops that 6% capability decay dead in its tracks.
It restores the operator's agency. They are no longer a liability sponge absorbing the legal risk for a frictionless black box.
No, they're an active, engaged participant in a rigorously designed diagnostic process.
When we evaluate this through Dieter Ranz's philosophy, the implementation of the delayed overlay test is basically the ultimate expression of less but better.
It really is. We've been conditioned by Silicon Valley to believe that good design means removing all friction.
That a perfectly designed system requires zero cognitive effort from the user.
But Rams understood that true functional clarity requires honesty. And in a high-stakes environment where human capability is the ultimate safety net, designing an honest system means retaining exactly the right amount of friction.
It means refusing to make the interface so frictionless that the human mind simply slips off of it.
It's about designing an architecture that respects the human operator enough to actively challenge them rather than pacifying them.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by breaking down the harsh physical reality of the 3 a.m. reading room, where metabolic fatigue and frictionless software combine to trigger cognitive offloading.
Right?
We analyzed the hard empirical data from the International AI Safety Report, proving that this offloading results in a 6% decay in baseline diagnostic skill and an overwhelming susceptibility to automation bias.
We expose the fundamental disconnect in the executive metrics too, prioritizing throughput over human attention, leaving the operator as a mere liability sponge.
And finally, we explored Prasad Bond's restorative engineering, detailing how introducing a 3-second latency in a physical engagement check can completely restructure the human-machine dynamic.
By applying Dieter Rams' principles, we strip away the illusion of autonomous perfection and focus on the essential geometry of human attention.
Exactly. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a question to explore long after this audio ends. We spent this entire session analyzing how highly trained, expert radiologists lose 6% of their core diagnostic capability after just a few months of relying on a helpful, frictionless AI box.
But the mechanisms of cognitive offloading apply to all of us.
They really do. When you look at the frictionless software deployed in your own workflow, the predictive text, the algorithmic summaries, the automated navigation, what essential cognitive skills are you silently offloading right now?
Are you losing your ability to synthesize complex arguments? Is your spatial navigation decaying?
Are you outsourcing your critical evaluation of data to an interface that is designed to look confident even when it's just guessing?
It's worth thinking about.
What specific box in your daily life is actively letting your brain go to sleep? And more importantly, having understood the mechanics of restorative engineering, how can you design a mandatory 3-second delay into your own workflow tomorrow? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.